The Mycenaean civilization thrived in mainland Greece and offshore Aegean islands in the late Bronze Age from around 1600 BC. The Mycenaeans were descendants of Indo-Europeans who had migrated into Greece from the north after 1900 BC. Originally hailing from the flat terrain of grassland steppes between the Caucasus and Ukraine, these Indo-Europeans, whose descendants became the Mycenaeans, now encountered a vastly different landscape. Instead of the uninterrupted flat pastures they were previously accustomed to, they now faced a mountainous landscape, river valleys which cut grass plains off from each other, in addition to residing on separate different islands. Over many generations, this broken up landscape created ideal conditions for strong, distinct local communities to form. Each local community was centered around a palace complex. Each of these palaces was ruled over by a tribal chief king-like figure, sometimes referred to as a wanax. Each of these leaders presided over a society which was feudal in nature, with power dependent on maintaining a band of fierce elite warriors around them. From mainland Greece, the nascent Mycenaeans looked out onto the Aegean Sea, through which they developed a taste for what was beyond. Instead of interacting with the hill peoples further inland in Europe, they primarily cultivated maritime connections in the Aegean and beyond to those bordering the Mediterranean Sea. Foremost of the contacts of the Mycenaeans were the Minoans, who were situated on the island of Crete between the Aegean and Mediterranean seas. Unlike the Mycenaeans, the Minoans seem to have been non-Indo-European in origin, although their exact ethnic origin is still being debated. Either way, the Minoans shared a similar palace-based culture to the Mycenaeans. Minoan culture profoundly influenced the Mycenaeans, especially in art, which largely drew inspiration from natural forms. Building on this tradition, Mycenaean art was far more stylized and included geometric designs. Spiral devices were particularly prominent. Mycenaean decorations were disciplined and symmetrical. Mycenaean frescoes, while depicting Minoan-style bowl leaping and plants, also introduced a range of new subjects, including warriors, lions, battles, griffins, chariots, and boar hunts. This was not the only way in which the Mycenaean culture was distinct. As touched on earlier with the nature of the power of the Wanax leaders, the Mycenaeans were militaristic. Their palaces were typically highly fortified citadels, surrounded by imposing perimeter walls made up of large, unworked stone blocks. This method of building was later called Cyclopean masonry, inferring that only beings as large as the mythical giant Cyclops could have been strong enough to arrange them. One of the most notorious examples of Cyclopean architecture is the Lion Gate. The Lion Gate was the main entrance to the palace at Mycenae. Its construction is dated to the mid-13th century BC. The gate is 2.95 meters high, 9.68 feet. Near its top is a large stone lintel. Above this lintel is a limestone slab, on which two lionesses face off against each other. Lions served as an emblem of Mycenaean kings, symbolizing their power. Mycenaean palace complexes included regular features. They were built around a large central hall, known as the Megaron. The Megaron functioned as the focal point of each palace, as well as the throne room. Accommodation and storerooms were centered around the megaron. Close to these palaces, large burial chambers were located. These tombs contained a dome-shaped burial cavity covered by a corbelled roof, constructed by overlapping stone blocks to make arches. These structures were often covered with earth and accessed via a stone passageway. Those lucky enough to be interred in such Pholos tombs were entombed with valuable grave goods, including swords and ornate gold masks, displaying the opulent wealth of those laid to rest inside. One of the most striking examples of a Pholos tomb is the treasury of Arcturus on Panagitsa Hill in ancient Mycenae. It is the largest Mycenaean tomb found, and was built around 1250 BC, around the same time as the Lion Gate. The communities built around these palaces possessed infrastructure and amenities, such as durable solid stone bridges, sewers for draining away waste in a similar fashion to the Minoans, and sophisticated irrigation systems for agriculture. The Mycenaeans were well-travelled traders, going as far as Spain and the Levant, exporting ceramic vessels, wine and oil, and importing precious gems and metals, as well as ivory from Syria and lapis lazuli all the way from Afghanistan. Many of the goods the Mycenaeans traded were produced in their own workshops, including bronze weapons, pottery, jewelry, glass ornaments, carved gems, and textiles. While on such voyages for trade, the Mycenaeans built relations with other Bronze Age powers, the Hittites in Asia Minor, the New Kingdom in Egypt, and Babylonians and Assyrians in Mesopotamia. By 1400 BC, the Mycenaeans had become the dominant culture in the Aegean Sea, reaching their height. One of their crowning achievements was the development of the Linear B writing script. The script is made up from around 87 syllabic signs, representing sounds and letters, while more than 100 ideographic signs represent ideas and concepts. Approximately 6,000 surviving Linear B tablets have been uncovered. Linear B was used almost exclusively to catalogue commodities and produce, to support the efficient conduct of palace bureaucracy, likely to keep up with the complex trade in commodities across the Aegean and the Mediterranean Sea. While it was this trade which helped Mycenaean civilization to flourish, ironically, it also eventually contributed to the downfall of the Mycenaeans. The very bronze the Mycenaean civilization's wealth hinged upon relied on the long-distance import of tin from Cornwall in the British Isles, and Spain too in the far west. And also tin came from Afghanistan in the far east, alongside copper, which was primarily brought in from Cyprus. Once enough instability became widespread, whether through war or famine, to prevent the conduct of long-distance trade, the Mycenaeans' prospects became doomed. This is exactly what happened from around 1200 BC, with much blame, rightly or wrongly, being pinned on what French Egyptologist Emmanuel de Rouget termed the invasions of the sea peoples, who ravaged the Mediterranean. Much controversy has surrounded who these invaders really were, with various origin points from around the Mediterranean being proposed. One intriguing theory is that many of the sea peoples came from the stone, tower-building, Nuragic tribes of Sardinia, who, with their distinctive double-horned helmets, were known as the Shirden to the Egyptians. However, such attacks from without may not have even been necessary. It is just as likely that the Mycenaeans collapsed due to their own populations rising up from within, against the palace elites, destroying the social order as the economic instability intensified. By around 1050 BC, in the mid-11th century, the Mycenaean civilization was no more, beginning the so-called Greek Dark Ages. Although the Mycenaean civilization ended, the legacy of the Mycenaeans endured in this Dark Age. The beginnings of the Greek pantheon were started by the Mycenaeans. Texts have been found referring to Zeus, Artemis, Ares, Hermes, Poseidon, and Dionysus. The Mycenaeans also provided the backdrop for the legendary Dark Age poet Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, whose verses told the story of the reputed Mycenaean king Agamemnon's war with Troy and its aftermath, popularizing characters such as Achilles and Odysseus, who would profoundly influence not only later Greek civilization, but also the Romans